A man sits in a New York restaurant, and his hand is in his jacket pocket, and it is finding nothing. The plates are cleared. The coffee is cold. The waiter has left the check on the white tablecloth, face down, the way they did it back then, polite, discreet, and the man knows without turning it over roughly what it says. Dinner for a small group of businessmen at one of the better steakhouses in Manhattan in the winter of 1950 is not a small bill, and his wallet is at home. He patted the wrong coat on the way out the door, or he changed suits, or he simply forgot, the way anyone forgets, and now he is sitting in a leather booth with a problem that every adult has felt at least once in the pit of the stomach. He has eaten the meal. He cannot pay for it. What he does next is small. He works something out with the restaurant, quietly, the way a man with standing in the city can, and then he goes home, and he thinks about the feeling, not the embarrassment, the idea underneath it. Why, in the middle of the richest decade in the history of the country, should a man with money in the bank be unable to buy a dinner just because he is not carrying the right paper that night? His name was Frank McNamara, and the thing he would build out of that single uncomfortable evening would do more to change how Americans live, spend, save, and sink into debt than almost any law, any war, or any president of the century that followed. This is the story of a small rectangle of plastic that you almost certainly have within 10 feet of you right now. It is in a wallet, a purse, a back pocket, a phone case. You have swiped it, tapped it, handed it across a counter, read its number off the back into a telephone. It feels like nothing. It feels like the most ordinary object in modern life. And it began as a fix for a forgotten wallet and grew, in a single human lifetime, into a machine that quietly rewired the entire American economy and put the average household several $1,000s in the hole. How we got from that dinner table to here is a story of one accident, a few very bold men, a war between banks that you never saw, and a quiet legal decision in 1978 that may have cost you more money than you will ever know. Let us go back to the world before the card. To understand why the credit card mattered, you have to understand how strange money used to feel. For most of American history, the rule was simple and hard. If you wanted a thing, you paid for it. You paid in cash, in coins, and folded bills counted out on a counter, or you did not get the thing. There were no swipes, there was no tapping, there was the green in your pocket, and when it was gone, your day of buying was over. People got paid on Friday in an envelope, a paper envelope, with actual currency inside, and that envelope had to stretch across the week. Run out before payday, and you went without. You ate beans, you patched the shoes one more time, you waited. There was credit, of course. There had always been credit. But it was personal, and it was local, and it depended entirely on whether a particular human being trusted your face. The grocer down the street kept a little book, a paper ledger behind the register, and he would write your name in it and the amount you owed, and you would settle up at the end of the month when the pay came in. The hardware man did the same. So did the doctor, often, and the pharmacist. This was credit built on relationships. The man extending it knew your father. He knew where you worked. He knew if you were the kind to pay or the kind to skip town. If you moved to a new city, you had no credit at all, because nobody knew you. You started from zero, a stranger, cash only, until you had lived somewhere long enough to earn a name. Big stores ran their own versions of this. By the 1920s and 30s, the department stores and the oil companies had started handing out their own metal plates and paper cards, what they called charge plates, little tokens that said, "This customer is good with us." A Macy's plate worked at Macy's. A Shell card bought you gasoline at a Shell station, but a Shell card was useless at a hotel, and a department store plate could not buy you dinner, and none of them traveled. Each one was a private arrangement between one company and one customer, a closed loop. There were dozens of them. A traveling salesman might carry a thick stack of these cards. one for every chain he dealt with, and still be stranded the moment he stepped outside the small world where they were honored. That was the world Frank McNamara sat down to dinner in, a world where money was physical, where credit was a favor between people who knew each other, and where the moment you left your own neighborhood, your good name and your good standing simply did not come with you. The genius, if that is the word, of what came next was not the idea of buying now and paying later. People had done that for 1,000 years. The genius was making a stranger's promise to pay good everywhere, at once, to merchants who had never met him and never would. So in 1950, McNamara and his lawyer, a man named Ralph Schneider, started a company. They called it Diners Club because the first place it was meant to work was restaurants, the places where men like them entertained clients and ran up bills on the company's behalf and hated carrying enough cash to cover it. The pitch was elegant. A member would carry one small card. He could walk into any restaurant that had signed up with Diners Club, eat, and instead of paying, sign the check and present the card. The restaurant would get its money, in full, from Diners Club. Diners Club would then send the member a single bill at the end of the month for everything he had charged all over town, and the member would pay Diners Club. One card, one bill, every restaurant in the network. The customer never had to carry cash to a meal again. The restaurant never had to wonder if this stranger was good for it, because Diners Club stood behind him. And here is how a company makes money, giving people the privilege of not paying immediately. 2 ways. The member paid an annual fee, $3 a year for the card, which sounds like nothing, and in 1950 was real money but not much. The bigger cut came from the restaurants. Diners Club took 7% of every check. Think about that. For the right to be in the network, to attract these free-spending businessmen who would now choose your restaurant because they could charge it, you handed Diners Club 7 cents out of every dollar your customer spent. Restaurants grumbled. Restaurants also signed up because the man with the card spent more freely than the man counting out cash, and a fuller dining room at 93 cents on the dollar beat an empty one at 100. In its first year, Diners Club had a couple hundred members, friends and acquaintances of the founders mostly, and a few dozen restaurants in New York willing to take the card. It was tiny, it was a curiosity, and then it was not, because the idea was too good and too obvious, and it spread like a struck match. Hotels wanted in, then airlines. Within a few years, the card that started as a way to buy dinner could buy a plane ticket, a hotel room, a rental car, a night on the town in a city you had never visited, where not a single person knew your name. Diners Club had done the impossible. It had made a stranger creditworthy everywhere at once. Now, about that dinner, you have probably heard the story the way I told it at the start. The forgotten wallet, the mortifying moment, the flash of insight at the table. It is a wonderful story. It is the official origin of the entire credit card industry, told and retold for 70 years. There is just one problem with it. It is, at the very least, dressed up, and it may not have happened the way the legend says at all. The tale of the forgotten wallet appears to have been polished and quite possibly invented or heavily embellished by a man named Matty Simmons, who was Diners Club's first public relations man. Simmons later admitted, more or less, that he had to glamorize the birth of the card to give it a clean and charming founding moment that people would remember. And the plain reality was less cinematic. McNamara had been circling the idea for some time. He and Simmons had walked Manhattan trying to talk restaurants into the scheme well before any famous supper. The versions of the story do not even agree with each other. Some say it was dinner, some say lunch. Some say his wife came to rescue him. Some say he settled it on credit. The neat little parable of the man who forgot his wallet and changed the world is, like a great deal of American business mythology, a story sold to the public after the fact, because a good story sells better than a memo. I tell you this not to ruin it, I tell you because it is the first clue to what the credit card really is and always was. From its very first day, this product was wrapped in a story designed to make you feel a certain way. The convenience, the freedom, the sophistication of the man who does not need to carry cash. The card was never just a tool, it was a feeling, sold hard, and the selling of that feeling is most of what comes next. Because the men running America's banks were watching Diners Club, and they were doing math. Diners Club was a charge card. That is an important word, and most people miss it. A charge card means you settle the whole balance every month. You charge your dinners and your hotels all through October, and on the 1st of November, the bill comes, and you pay all of it. Diners Club was lending you money for a few weeks at a time, no more. They made their money on the fees, the 7% and the $3, not on interest, because there was no long-term debt to charge interest on. The bankers looked at that and saw something Diners Club had left on the table. What if you did not have to pay it all back at once? What if, instead of demanding the full balance every month, the company let you pay just a piece of it, a minimum, and then charged you interest, month after month, on everything you still owed? Now the customer is not borrowing for 3 weeks. The customer is borrowing for 3 years or 30, carrying a balance that never quite goes to zero, paying interest on it the whole time. That is not a fee business. That is a lending business. And lending, when it works, is one of the most profitable things a bank can possibly do. This is the invention that mattered, not the card, the revolving balance, the idea that the debt could roll, that you would pay and never be done, and that every dollar you did not pay this month would earn the bank money next month. The plastic was just the delivery system. Revolving credit was the engine, and it is the engine that is still running in your wallet today. The bank that figured out how to put that engine in the hands of ordinary Americans, all at once, was Bank of America in California. And the way it did it, in the autumn of 1958, was one of the strangest and most reckless experiments in the history of American money. The town was Fresno, in the dusty heart of California's Central Valley. Bank of America picked it carefully. It was big enough to matter, around 250,000 people, and small enough to contain a disaster if things went wrong. The bank already held nearly half the accounts in town, so it had a relationship with most of the people there. And the man behind the plan was a 41-year-old bank executive named Joseph Williams, who ran a little in-house think tank with the bland name of the Customer Services Research Department. Williams had an idea so bold it crossed over into foolish, and he had talked his bosses into letting him try it. He was not going to ask people if they wanted a credit card. He was going to mail them one. Not an application, not an offer, an actual, live, working credit card, ready to use, dropped straight into the mailbox of a person who had never requested it, never asked for it, never heard of it. Tear open the envelope, and there it is, a line of credit you did nothing to earn, sitting in your hand, good at stores all over town. They called it the Bank AmeriCard, and in September of 1958, the bank simply mailed 60,000 of them to the people of Fresno, unsolicited, all at once. The industry would remember it forever by a short and almost gentle name, the Fresno Drop. Now put yourself in that town. One ordinary morning, 60,000 households open the mail and find free money. Not everyone, but a huge slice of an entire city, suddenly holding the ability to buy things they could not previously afford, with no cash, no questions, just a signature. Williams had run his projections. He assumed Americans were fundamentally honest and careful. He figured that late payments would never climb above about 4%, that people would be responsible with this gift, that the goodness of the average customer would carry the whole thing. He was catastrophically wrong. The delinquency rate did not come in at 4%. It came in above 20. More than 1 in 5 accounts went bad. People charged things they had no way to pay for and then did not pay. And worse, the criminals figured it out almost overnight. Here was a brand new kind of money, and a brand new kind of theft to go with it. Cards got stolen out of mailboxes before they ever reached the people they were addressed to. Counterfeiters learned to copy them. Police departments across California found themselves dealing with a crime that had not existed a year earlier, credit card fraud, and they had no idea how to handle it. The whole thing tipped toward chaos. Bank of America officially admitted to losing nearly $9 million on the launch, and when you fold in the advertising and the overhead, the real number was probably closer to $20 million, which in 1958 was a staggering sum to set on fire. Joseph Williams, the man who believed in the basic goodness of his neighbors, resigned in December of 1959, a little over a year after his great experiment, his projections in ruins. He had been too trusting. He had assumed the best of people, and the people, or at least enough of them, had taken the money and run. And yet, here is the turn that makes this whole story matter, the cold and important fact underneath the wreckage. Bank of America did not quit. They looked at the disaster in Fresno, at the fraud and the bad debt and the millions lost, and they did not conclude that the idea was wrong. They concluded that the idea was right and the execution was sloppy. Tighten the controls, get better at spotting fraud, be smarter about who gets a card, but keep dropping the cards. Keep the engine running, because behind all the losses, they had seen the other number, the one that mattered more than any of it. The people who did pay, the responsible majority, were carrying balances. They were not settling up in full every month like a Diners Club member. They were paying the minimum and rolling the rest. And on that rolling balance, the bank was charging interest. The losses were the cost of starting the machine. The interest was the machine itself, and the machine, once it was running, never stopped. Within a few years, the Bank AmeriCard turned a profit, and the other banks, watching California, did exactly what banks do. They wanted in. This is where it becomes a war. Bank of America could not be everywhere. Banking laws of the time kept banks largely penned inside their own states, so Bank of America could not simply open branches across the country and blanket the nation with its own cards. So it did the next thing. Starting in the mid-1960s, it began licensing the Bank AmeriCard to other banks in other states. You, a bank in Ohio or Texas, could pay Bank of America for the right to issue Bank AmeriCards to your own customers and plug into the growing network of merchants who accepted them. The cards spread state by state, bank by bank, a franchise of credit blanketing the map. But the banks that were not invited, or that did not want to live under Bank of America's thumb, had a different idea. If one giant could build a national card network, why couldn't a group of them band together and build their own? In 1966, in a meeting in Buffalo, New York, a collection of banks did exactly that. They formed an alliance, an association of banks that would honor each other's cards, a rival network to compete with the Bank AmeriCard. It went through a few names and finally settled on one that would become a household word. They called it Master Charge. Years later, it would be renamed again to the name you know, MasterCard. So now there were two great armies of plastic marching across the country. Bank AmeriCard on one side, Master Charge on the other, each one a network of hundreds of banks, each one racing to sign up more merchants and put more cards into more hands. And how do you win a war like that? You win it by saturation. You win it by making sure your card is in every wallet and accepted at every counter before the other side gets there. And the fastest way to do that, the proven way, the way Fresno had shown them, was to mail the cards out unsolicited. So that is what they did, on a scale that makes the Fresno drop look like a rehearsal. Through the middle and late 1960s, American mailboxes filled up with credit cards nobody had asked for. Banks across the country mailed out live, ready-to-use cards by the millions. Tens of millions of them, eventually, flying out to households all over the nation, to people who had not requested them. Housewives got them, college students got them, people who had no income got them, people who were dead got them, mailed to their old addresses, children got them, in some cases, cards arriving addressed to family pets and to babies, because the mailing lists were crude and the banks did not much care. The whole point was to flood the country, to get the plastic into the hand before the customer thought too hard about it, because once the card was in the wallet, it got used. It was, in plain terms, chaos. Cards stolen by the bagful from the postal system. Fraud running wild. Families that had carefully avoided debt their whole lives, suddenly holding 3 or 4 lines of credit they never sought, the temptation sitting right there in the kitchen drawer. A whole nation was being enrolled in revolving debt, whether it wanted to be or not, one unrequested envelope at a time. This is the part where the government finally noticed. The flood of unwanted cards, the fraud, the stories of people ruined by debt they had been mailed without asking, it built into a scandal big enough that Washington had to act. In 1968, Congress passed the Truth in Lending Act, a landmark consumer law, and it forced something onto the credit card business that the business had spent years avoiding. It forced disclosure. Now the lenders had to tell you, in writing, what the card actually cost you. The interest rate, the annual percentage rate, that number you have seen 1,000 times and maybe never really read, the finance charge, the terms. For the first time, the price of the easy money had to be printed where the borrower could see it. And then, in 1970, Congress amended that law to kill the practice that had started it all. It became illegal to mail people credit cards they had not asked for. The Fresno drop, the great unsolicited flood, the dropping of live cards into the mailboxes of strangers, was over. From now on, a bank could mail you an offer, an application, an invitation, but it could not mail you a working card you had not requested. The same law also said that if your card was lost or stolen, you could not be held responsible for more than $50 of whatever a thief charged on it, which is the reason that to this day you can report a stolen card and not be ruined by it. You might think that would have slowed the whole thing down, cut off the flood, made Americans think harder before they took on a card. It did the opposite. The card was already in tens of millions of wallets. The habit was already formed. And the banks, blocked from mailing live cards, simply got better and louder at mailing offers, those pre-approved invitations that to this day arrive in your mailbox by the dozen, each one a polite request for you to please come borrow some money. The regulation cleaned up the worst of the chaos. It did nothing to stop the larger thing, the deep change already happening in how Americans thought about money, the slow rewiring of the national mind away from save first, buy later, toward buy now, worry later, pay forever. That rewiring was the whole revolution, and it happened so gradually that almost nobody noticed they had changed. Think about what the card did to the simplest moment in economic life, the moment of buying a thing you want but cannot quite afford. In the old world, that moment ended in a single word: no. You did not have the cash, so the answer was no, and you went home and saved for it, or you went without. The cash in your pocket was a hard wall, and that wall, frustrating as it was, kept most people most of the time from spending money they did not have. The credit card took the wall away. Now the answer at the register was almost always yes. Yes, you can have it, today, right now, and you can deal with the cost later, a little at a time. A small payment each month that feels almost painless. The thing you wanted comes home with you tonight. The cost arrives in slow motion, spread so thin you can barely feel each piece of it. That is a profound change in human behavior, and the people who issued the cards understood it perfectly. A customer facing a hard wall buys what he needs. A customer facing no wall buys what he wants. And then, a little more than that. The card did not just let people spend money they did not have, It gently, constantly encouraged them to. Studies have shown it for decades. Put a person in a store with cash and they are careful. Put the same person in the same store with a card and they spend more freely because the card does not feel like real money leaving your hands. It feels like nothing, a swipe, a signature, the pain of paying, that healthy little sting that used to make you pause. The card quietly removed it, and an economy with the pain of paying removed is an economy that buys and buys and buys. By the 1970s, this was no longer a novelty. It was becoming the water Americans swam in. Just before the end of that decade, around 1977, roughly a third of American households had at least one credit card. A little over a decade later, more than half of all families did. The card had gone from a curiosity for traveling businessmen to a fixture of ordinary middle-class life in the kitchen drawer of millions of homes, as normal as the telephone. And the balances on those cards, the debt that rolled from month to month, was climbing right along with them. But the banks still had a problem, and it was a big one, and the way it got solved is the part of this story that almost nobody knows. It is the quiet legal turn that, more than any forgotten wallet, made the modern credit card what it is. The problem was the interest. For all the genius of the revolving balance, the banks were running into a wall built by the states. Most states had old laws on the books, called usury laws, laws with deep roots, going back centuries, going back to a basic moral idea that there is a limit to how much interest it is decent to charge a person. These laws capped the interest rate. In a lot of states, the ceiling was around 18%, in some states, lower. And in the 1970s, with inflation raging and the cost of money sky high, those caps were strangling the credit card business. A bank might have to pay more to borrow money than the law allowed it to charge customers on a card. The whole engine of revolving interest was seizing up, choked by laws meant to protect borrowers from exactly this. Then came 1978, and a Supreme Court case with a dull name and enormous consequences. Marquette National Bank versus First of Omaha. The details are dry. A bank chartered in Nebraska was issuing cards to customers in Minnesota and charging them Nebraska's higher interest rate, which was above what Minnesota's own usury law allowed. Minnesota said, "You cannot do that to our citizens." The case went all the way up, and in 1978, the Supreme Court ruled, unanimously, on a question that sounds technical and turned out to be the ballgame. The court said the interest rate is set by the state where the bank is located, not the state where the customer lives. Read that again, because it changed your financial life and you were probably never told. It meant that a bank no longer had to obey the usury laws of your state. It only had to obey the usury laws of its own state, the state where it set up shop, and then it could export that rate to customers everywhere. Your state might cap credit card interest at 18% to protect you. It did not matter anymore. If the bank that issued your card was headquartered in a state with no cap at all, it could charge you whatever that state allowed, which might be no limit whatsoever. And the banks understood instantly what to do with this. They went looking for a state, any state, that would tear up its usury laws and welcome them. Find a state with no cap on interest, set up your credit card operation there, and you could now charge any customer in the country any rate you liked. The old protective laws of all 50 states rendered toothless in a single stroke. The most famous deal closed in 1981. Citibank, one of the largest banks in the country, based in New York where the usury laws were tight, was bleeding money on its cards. South Dakota, a quiet farm state out on the plains, was in a recession and hungry for jobs. So the governor of South Dakota, a man named Bill Janklow, and the head of Citibank, Walter Wriston, made a deal. South Dakota would change its laws, lift the cap on interest, and roll out the welcome mat. In exchange, Citibank would move its entire credit card operation to Sioux Falls and bring hundreds of jobs to the state. The legislature passed it fast. Citibank moved in, and from a quiet office building in South Dakota, A bank could now legally charge a cardholder in California or Florida or Maine an interest rate that those states had spent 100 years making illegal. Other banks followed, to South Dakota, to Delaware, to wherever the welcome was warmest and the caps were gone. This is why, to this day, your credit card statement comes from a bank address in a state you have probably never lived in. It is not an accident. It is the legacy of Marquette and the deals that followed, the centuries-old usury laws, the moral ceiling on interest that civilizations had maintained in one form or another since ancient times, were quietly stepped around in the span of a few years, and the cap came off the cost of American debt. The interest rate on a credit card, once held down by law, was now free to climb, and climb it did, up toward 20% and beyond, where a great deal of it sits today. That was the moment the credit card became what it is now. Before Marquette, it was a convenience with a leash on it. After Marquette, it was a profit machine without one. The cards that had once been a money loser the banks tolerated became one of the most profitable products in all of American finance. And the most profitable customer of all was not the person who paid in full each month. The bank had a name for that careful person, almost a dirty word inside the industry: the convenience user, the deadbeat, the person who used the card and paid it off and never carried a balance and therefore never paid a cent of interest. The banks did not want that person. The customer the banks loved, the customer the whole machine was now built to find and feed, was the one who carried a balance, the revolver, the one who paid the minimum, month after month, year after year, the interest piling on the interest, the debt rolling forward forever, the most reliable river of profit the banking world had ever discovered. And so the marketing turned. Through the 1980s and 1990s and into our own time, the offers came not by the 1,000, but by the 100 million, pre-approved. 0% for the first 6 months, then a number on the back you had to squint to read. A card for every college freshman, handed out at folding tables on campus with a free t-shirt as bait, given to teenagers with no income and no idea, because the bank knew that a young person who got comfortable carrying a balance might carry one for the next 50 years. Rewards, points, cash back, miles, every one of those shiny inducements paid for, in the end, by the interest and the fees of the people who could least afford to carry the debt. The whole glittering apparatus of modern credit card marketing rests on a simple foundation. It is built to find the people who will revolve and to keep them revolving. Which brings us, at last, to your wallet, to right now, to the world that dinner in 1950 built. Americans today owe more than $1 trillion on their credit cards. Not millions, not billions. Over $1 trillion, with a T, a number so large it stops meaning anything. More than the entire economy of most nations on Earth, owed by ordinary people on small rectangles of plastic, accruing interest every single day. Spread across the households of the country, the average family carries something in the neighborhood of $9,000 of it. $9,000. At an interest rate that for many cards now runs around 20% or higher, which means that a family carrying that balance and paying only the minimum can pay for years and years, and watch the thing they bought wear out and break, and get thrown away long before they have finished paying for it. The shoes are in a landfill. The dinner was digested decades ago. The debt remains. This is the hidden cost. Not the convenience, which is real. The card genuinely did make life smoother in 1,000 ways. The cost is the slow, quiet financial weight that an entire nation now carries as a matter of course, the normalization of owing money on the everyday, the dissolving of that old hard wall that used to stop people from buying what they could not afford. We did not vote for this. No one ever stood up and asked the American people whether they wished to become a nation that lives on borrowed money at 20% interest. It happened to us, gradually, through a forgotten wallet and a reckless drop in Fresno, and a war between banks and a dry Supreme Court case most people have never heard of. Until one day, It was simply the way things are, the water we all swim in, invisible because it is everywhere. Frank McNamara, by the way, did not get rich off the thing he started. He sold his stake in Diners Club only a few years after founding it, for a sum that was real but modest, and he died young, in his late 40s, of a heart attack, long before the small idea from that restaurant table grew into the trillion-dollar weight it carries today. He never saw what it became. He never saw the Fresno drop, or Marquette, or the offers by the 100 million, or the average family $9,000 under. He just wanted a way to buy dinner without carrying cash. Whether the dinner ever really happened the way the legend says, we will probably never know for certain. But the want behind it, the wish for a yes where there used to be a no, that was real, and it turned out that almost everyone shared it, and a great many people made a great deal of money giving it to us. So the next time you reach for it, the card in your pocket, the one you tap without thinking, hold it a second longer than usual. Feel how light it is. That weightlessness is the whole trick. It was designed, from the very beginning, to make the spending feel like nothing, and the cost arrives somewhere else, later, in slow motion, in a statement from a bank in a state you have never visited. It is the most ordinary object in your life, and one of the most quietly powerful inventions of the last 100 years, and it was sold to you every step of the way, wrapped in a story about freedom. Whether it has made you freer or simply made the wall disappear so you would walk straight through where it used to stand, is a question only you can answer, standing at the register, card in hand, in the world that one forgotten wallet built. If you want more forgotten stories like this one, the true history behind the ordinary things you never think twice about, you know what to do.